Are MMO launches just... And if so, why? Do we get distracted by just too many games? Or are the ones that release just not that good? That's the question posed in an article on mmorpg.com by Steven Weber. In this video, I'll give you my answer, or at least my thoughts. And keep in mind, I'm just a YouTuber, so it's just my thoughts. It's not the end all. So I'm actually more interested in yours. I'm more interested in your thoughts on this question. Specifically, to kind of keep the conversation, are MMORPG launches struggling because the games are not of good quality, or because there are just so many different games out there that were spread very thin? And so we kind of go into these new games with hopes of testing it out, and then when it's kind of boring or not what we wanted, we just go straight back to our old games. I want to say a quick thank you to our members of this channel, Galerain and Dupre. Thank you so much for your support. Let's go on into what we have to look at with this. Let's dissect this question, and let's start with a good example of one that we all kind of saw and witnessed the catastrophic collapse of: New World. New World is a prime example of the boom and bust cycle many MMOs seem to be going through, as it launched to immense hype, only to come crashing down. For the first MMO to launch, and really the first game for Amazon Game Studios, the launch was okay, but the bugs were really kind of unacceptable. Some of the oversight just appeared to be missing, and I think those bugs alone soured the game for many people before they saw the other issues in the survival PvP turned MMO. To the studio's credit though, New World has continued to get sizable content and bug updates since its launch, and there's some signs of life as the new Brimstone Sands land expansion and yet another post-launch weapon type, the Greatsword, have ignited enough interest to bring back some server queues and prompted the launch of new servers in a few regions. But even that seemingly good news for New World, its Steam charts are nowhere near its peak. July to August saw a 24% gain for its average players, from 13,298 to 16,504. When it released in October of 2021, the average player was an astronomically high 410,000. 1 month later, it had dropped to 155,000, and the steep decline continued from there. As we approach the 1-year anniversary of New World, unless Brimstone Sands does the unthinkable, many will have considered New World a dead MMO, or at least a somewhat failed MMO. But is it the fault of New World and its quality, or is it a greater trend? After all, Lost Ark had a starting collapse as well, from 700,000 average at launch to 151,000 7 months on. Lost Ark has already seen success for years in other markets before it made its way west, and it's been hotly anticipated, but it was far from immune from this drop. What's behind the giant launches and startling collapses of these new games? And could this be a good thing or a bad thing for the MMO genre? Now granted, before we go too far into it, there are a ton of variables in this. You could look to New World and its content gaps, you could look to the server issues, you could look to the bugs. For Lost Ark, you could look to the monetization and the somewhat aged version of the game that we got here in the West. But that's gonna just convolute the topic here, so let's just press on a little bit and talk about it in large terms, macro terms. The aforementioned article from mmorpg.com poses some of these questions. It's not just new releases either that it refers to. The article points to games with strong IPs like Star Wars: The Old Republic and Lord of the Rings Online, both of which have at times struggled with population, or at least enough to change up their monetization models and go free to play, which is often seen as a move to snag new players or bring back old ones by removing monetary barriers to entry. Though I'd hazard here that free to play has matured as a gaming model over the years, and it's perhaps not quite the cry for help it used to be, or how it's painted in this article. But the struggle to maintain excitement for new MMOs, even just a year later, could paint a grim picture for the genre. And yet, many MMOs are still releasing or expanding. In recent memory, say the last 2 or 3 years, we've actually had more MMORPG launches or soft launches than you might realize. New World, Lost Ark, Bless Unleashed, Astelia, Bless Online, Temtem, Tower of Fantasy, Broken Ranks, Mortal Online 2, Elion, Sword of Legends Online, Crowfall, Legends of Aria. And that doesn't even cover the alternative modes we got, like Archage Unchained, World of Warcraft Classic, Everquest progression servers, legendary servers in Lord of the Rings Online, etc. Or expansions of which we've had countless for new and old games alike. And this might actually be part of the problem, according to this article: saturation of the MMO market. There's just too much. The article looks at the saturation of the market as one of the factors, as well as the similarities between games. Far from complete or accurate count with duplicate titles like Guild Wars 2 and Guild Wars 2 Complete Collection, or arguably not MMO games like Dragon Ball Xenoverse 2 in the list, the MMORPG tag lists 403 results on Steam. Switch over to massively multiplayer and it pulls back 2,648 matches. Pull up mmopopulation.com and you'll get a much smaller list at 132, but still significant when you consider the breadth of an MMO. Side note that many of the games listed on that list are actually closed. For example, they have Everquest Online Adventures. Is there an Everquest Online Adventures emulator that I haven't heard of? Because if so, I'd really freaking like to play it, because I couldn't play that shit when I was younger, because I couldn't, this could not figure out how to make my PS2 like connect to the internet. Like I grew up with AOL.
You've got mail.
I didn't know how that shit worked. Those numbers though to me are a bit misleading. MMOs are definitely top heavy. Pull up 20 top 10 lists and you'll probably only have a handful of different MMOs swapping around the 5 to 10 spots. And of course, it's regional. Lost Ark, for example, was a new release in the West this year, but it's been around for years. But new MMOs seem to have been launching at a pretty steady pace. They're just not always the big budget titles we're used to. So a lot of them will go under the radar and close under the radar too. Some tend to straddle the line between survival games and MMO, begging the question of what it is that makes an MMO an MMO. But that's the subject for another video. There's no doubt that there's a ton of MMOs out there. Some differentiate themselves while others follow tried and true patterns. The WoW clone still exists with slight tweaks to the formulas. New World tried a few different things, but it still looked a lot like a barren ESO or Guild Wars 2 with some incredible sound design thrown in. Fractured Online is on its way, but it's yet to set itself apart from Legends of Aria or its predecessor, Ultima Online, which launched in 1997. Even Path of Exile feels like a successful blending of Diablo and Ultima Online. Crowfall tried to be the Fortnite of Shadowbane, and it suffered for it. And we won't even get into the fact that Ashes of Creation had a Battle Royale mode. No, that wasn't concerning at all. I still support that game though. Even new MMOs on the horizon are looking to the past while continuing to innovate on smaller pieces. Look at Ashes of Creation and Pantheon Rise of the Fallen, and it's pretty easy to trace back at least some of their inspiration. The similarities can be helpful, adding some familiarity from the get-go, but it can also hurt a game in my opinion, because if you've invested thousands of hours in World of Warcraft, and it's been polished for decades, and then a new tab target theme park MMO with updated graphics comes out with 1/20th the content and none of the nostalgia, why switch? Sure, you might jump in and try it, but you also might just go back to World of Warcraft as soon as that little novelty of a new game wears off. World of Warcraft is where you felt at home. It's where you know what different skills do, what each map consists of, what the lore or the strange convoluted version of it is. It's your world. Honestly, I'm that person. I've gone back to Everquest for 2 decades. I've tried countless MMOs. Some have stuck for a little while, others I've lost interest in quickly. I want to find a new MMO, but none have really managed to make me forget about my home. And that might be because I'm not giving them enough time, or I'm expecting too much. Many of us are looking for the next big thing in MMOs. We might elevate our expectations, especially as we roll into hype cycles for games, perhaps hoping, begging for a game to come along that will just be so damn good, it will finally pull us from our old homes. Inevitably, these have flopped for many of us. The next big thing has been a brief cycle of excitement, crashing historically once we get bored with it, sometimes in as short a time as a month. I tried Lord of the Rings Online years ago, very, very briefly. I grew so disinterested within the first hour I quit. Essentially, I didn't get out of the tutorial for that game. When I first played Lost Ark, it was during beta. I managed 2 hours. 2 hours in that game, and I was done. I wasn't willing to give these games time to grow on me. This is actually one of the comments made in this article. The ease with which we can get distracted and how quickly we will abandon a game. With so many options, both new and old, we might not be giving an MMO enough time to marinate. Now, as a content creator, I have to give more MMOs time, and both Lost Ark and Lord of the Rings I have returned to, and I had very different opinions about each one. I set a bar for first impressions of about 30 hours of gameplay, but many people might not give an MMO that much. They might not even give it half of that. It means the first impression of an MMO is critical, and if it flops, the MMO will likely suffer. How many times have you tried to convince a friend that no, just hold on, it does get better, I promise, just stick it out a little bit longer in this game. You just wait until how this part's gonna be amazing. I've done that. I've done that with Everquest. I've done that with games like Ultima Online. Some of these older games that I adore and love, and struggle to convince people that, hey, it does get better. Even Final Fantasy XIV knew that their first player story, especially in the base game, was so bad that they allowed you to buy boosts specifically to skip that story. And then they went back and got rid of all the filler in that first player story in the base game, like they were, no DBZ Kai or something. That's right, I used to be a weeb. The margin of error is very thin for a new MMO in today's market. The luxury of releasing a shit show just isn't there. There are too many options, not just in the MMO market, but gaming and entertainment in general. That impatience can lead to a boom-bust cycle that is catastrophic to an MMO. Few MMOs can survive an explosion in population and a monumental collapse in a short time frame. This can happen with all games. It's not a uniquely MMO problem, but it does cause some interesting issues for an MMO specifically, as they rush to meet the demands of floods of players only to have the population collapse, leaving empty servers, a bland experience for the players remaining, and the MMO to pick up the pieces. The MMO has been ransacked and left hollowed out. Populations are broken across servers, and everyone is left weary and uncertain where to go next. Your friends may quit, or will soon. They may have moved on to the next MMO, or move back to their old game. And if you need that social connection in your game, you might quit too. The problems get exacerbated. This even happens with something like an Everquest progression server. So it's not just new MMOs. To me, this is not just an issue of the quality of the MMO, but rather, if we take off our glasses, clean them off a little bit, and look at our old games, we might see some of the issues that have plagued them for years, for decades even. We might remember some of those long server downtimes. I personally remember a lot of times sitting in chats waiting for the Everquest servers to come up as I, sat back and pretended to do my homework. There are issues. There are still issues with those games. And with Everquest, Project 99 exists, and I will never really play it because that is a game that I no longer want to play. It's just that is not the experience that I'm looking for anymore. Those games that we have this wonderful opinion of, there is a lot of reasons why they still have that strong pull on us. They are still, in a lot of ways, our homes. I love Everquest, but it also has a lot of issues. It doesn't necessarily mean that the new games launching are just lesser quality, but we may have been a little bit more understanding. And perhaps, to the article's point, part of that may have been because there were fewer options. For that reason, I'm going to say it's not necessarily the quality of the games that's the issue here, but the sheer quantity of MMOs, not just new ones, but old ones too, that have deep connections for us. And that kind of goes in hand with this punishing nature of the boom bust cycle, which just creates all these new problems for these new MMOs. As the article points out, we are spread pretty thin across many games. There are so many MMOs that are home to many of us. I have friends now playing Guild Wars 2. I could not convince them to hop over to Lord of the Rings Online. In the past, I tried to get people to play Everquest, but they were stuck in World of Warcraft. And then that doesn't even talk about games like Final Fantasy XIV, which has its own very strong following, or RuneScape, which is still around. The slow growth of an MMO seems elusive to me for these three reasons. One, we all want the next big thing. We're not really sure what that is. Two, we have deep attachments to our current MMO. And three, MMOs are reliant on populations, and the boom-bust cycle is not something many games know how to handle yet. Opening of servers is the go-to way to figure it out, but when the population collapses, that leads to all new problems. I did my best to give a older MMO really a good first impression. I alluded to earlier that I had played Lord of the Rings Online for about an hour and I had quit. Well, I tried it again and put in my requisite 30 hours in that game. And I did my first impressions, and you can find that here. I'm curious if you think my opinion changed after getting through what I thought was one of the worst starts of a game that I ever had experienced before. Go take a look. My name is Redbeard Flynn. Thank you so much for your time, and I hope you have a great day.